Carson Wentz laid out the goals for 2018.
Yes, he did.
Some other NFL news and notes. Richard Sherman making news today as well for some of the things that he's had to say, John, and it's kind of goes down the road of these other sports are making so much money. And you wonder, does Richard Sherman actually have a point here this time? When Sherman speaks, a lot of people just kind of scoff. But does this time Sherman, is he speaking something of relevancy?
Well, I mean, it depends how you define it. I think the NFL players probably deserve more of a percentage of the gross revenue than the other sports because it's the most popular sport. So I think that's a legitimate argument. But when you start talking about NBA-like contracts, we talked on the show a while ago. I mean, it just doesn't make sense from a mathematical standpoint. Too many people play football. You need 53 players to make up an NFL team. As I mentioned, you have a 10-man practice squad. Then you have guys on injured reserve who still get their paycheck. You end up playing anywhere from 70 to 80 players per season versus 15. Now it's going to be 17 in the NBA. That's a significant difference. So when you start splitting up the numbers, bottom line is NFL players are never going to be paid like high-level NBA players. It's just the math doesn't add up.
So is there some legitimate concern that something happens here, some sort of lockout, walkout, something out?
Well, there's always concern when the collective bargaining agreement is up. I mean, you just saw it. One of the bad narratives, you hear this constantly, is the NFL players lose in collective bargaining, where basketball players win and baseball players win. Well, the basketball players got destroyed in 2011, destroyed in their own lockout. And the reason NBA player salaries have exploded is because of the great increase in revenue, mainly due to TV money. That has nothing to do with winning in collective bargaining. They lost, and they lost mightily. So when the time is up for the NFL, which is 2020, there's always the possibility of a lockout or a strike. It's been a pretty successful system for both sides. As I said, do I think the NFL players should get a little bit more of a percentage of revenue? Yeah, I would probably agree with that. And if they want to fight for that, then you could, as I said, you could have a strike, or you could even have a lockout from the owner's perspective, saying, hey, we're just going to be proactive about it and not let you strike.
Yeah, I guess they showed the contracts on the screen behind us here on ESPN. It was, Stanton making $328 million. You've got most of the guys in other sports up guaranteed money up over 3 digits, where the highest guaranteed money in the NFL, $77 million, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, and the people's argument there, I think it's another one. The argument has always been because football is a more dangerous sport, more contracts should be guaranteed, when in common sense says that's the reason they're not guaranteed. You can't run a business if, say, you're paying Derek Carr money you just mentioned that baseball players make, or James Harden or anyone else. If you guarantee that money to, say, Derek Carr, and all of a sudden he's hurt, he can't play, well, then you have $200, $300 million of guaranteed money on the books for nobody who's going to play. And that's untenable. So the fact that you have so many injuries in football is the reason there aren't guaranteed contracts. Now, there's a way you can circumvent that, but it becomes year-by-year contracts. So if players want to fight for these one-year deals and say all that money's going to be guaranteed, but that's pretty much the system we have.
Well,
is everything in the NFL is a 1 year or 2 year guaranteed contract.
Now, Sherman says NFL players would be willing to strike in order to get those huge guaranteed contracts, but how do you engineer that? Is everybody going to be on board? I mean, that seems like it's willy-nilly.
No, nobody's going to be on board because once remember, it's not Richard Sherman's job to negotiate these types of things. And once he's sat down and explained the situation and it's laid out, you start to understand it. And it's just not, you can't pick a hill to die on if the hill doesn't even exist. And that's what sort of those guaranteed contracts in the NFL, it's just not plausible from a business standpoint. So from a player perspective, you have to understand, you have to make a decision on what's important. Would you rather, as I said, go from year to year, true one-year contracts, say with a team option, and say if you're making $15 million, that's completely guaranteed. And then if you're healthy, you get another $15 million the next year, or $17 million, or what have you. You could probably fight for that and garner that. But to have long-term 6-year contracts, 5-year contracts with these massive guarantees, it's just not plausible in such a dangerous sport.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3. John, what about the revenue, though, the NFL generates? It's so much more than the NBA. In 2016, the NFL generated $13 billion. The NBA was $4.8 billion. Couldn't the NFL, couldn't the league afford to pay players more guaranteed money?
Well, they can and they have. Those numbers are a little bit old. It's now $13 billion. That's correct from the NFL number. The NBA spiked to $8 billion, so they're way above, as I said, because of the TV revenue, and that's why you saw the large spike in player salary. But still, it's significantly higher. But of the money that's shared, the NBA players get 51%. The NFL players get 48.5%. So that's where the NFL players have a strong argument. And they can go in and say, look, we generate more money. We have better television ratings. We're a more popular sport. We should at least get 52% if NBA players are getting 51%. And that, I think, is a legitimate argument.
Sherman said, by the way, when it was asked last night whether NFL players would have to consider striking to get deals like the NBA guys, quote, 100%, if we want, as the NFL, as a union, to get anything done, players have to be willing to strike. That's the thing that guys need to 100% realize. You're going to have to miss a game. You're going to have to lose some money if you're willing to make the point, because that's how MLB and NBA got it done. They missed games. They struck. They flexed every bit of power they had. It was awesome, and it worked out for them. So, you know, there's him saying, but "Look, we've got to show these owners who's boss."
That's factually incorrect. That's what I was saying. That is factually incorrect. In 2011, when the NBA players were locked out, it was not a strike. They were locked out by the owners. The owners locked them out because they claimed 22 of the teams were losing money. They claimed it was an untenable system. Whether you want to believe that or not, you know, you can, you can't. That's not the issue. But the NBA owners won. They knocked it down from 57% to a 50-50 split. The NBA players got destroyed. So Richard Sherman's quote there is just factually incorrect. The explosion of NBA salaries has nothing to do with winning in collective bargaining. It has everything to do with the explosion of league revenue. So from that standpoint, it's wrong. Everything he said is completely wrong.
And we're kind of seeing, I know the top-level stars are getting ridiculously paid, guys like James Harden and, I mean, even Durant. I mean, Curry.
Steph Curry got a big extension.
They're going to get the big deals. But you are seeing some of the salaries get kind of pushed back down to normalcy here. We saw Kentavious Caldwell-Pope only 1 year, $18 million, when a lot of people thought he would get $100 million plus deal. But I think that was kind of the market saying, look, we can't go out spending that money because the TV deal is going to go back to normal soon.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to go too far. Look in Philadelphia here with J.J. Redick. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a nice role player. I think he's a good fit for the Sixers. What do you get, $23 million? There's basically two quarterbacks in the NFL that are going to make more than $23 million. And, yeah, you say to yourself, how can J.J. Redick make more money than Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or dozens of NFL players? Dozens. Again, it's a different landscape. There had been 15 players. Now it's expanding to 17 players. It's just common, it's just basic arithmetic is what it is. I mean, if you're splitting a pie amongst much fewer people, you're going to get a bigger piece. And even if the pie is smaller, you're going to get a significantly bigger piece than a guy who's got to split it with 69 other guys. I mean, that part of it's never going to change.
John McMullen with us. John, would you say part of the issue is the crazy pay differential between the NBA and the NFL? Does that have to do with how the leagues view their players? In the NBA, it seems to be about the name on the back of the jersey. In the NFL, more often than not, it's the team name on the front of the jersey.
No, I think that from that standpoint, I think NBA players certainly have an advantage because the league markets superstars more than they market teams. They always have, and they've done it well, and that kind of helps them with, outside revenue, whether it's sneaker deals, whether it's merchandising, stuff like that. It certainly helps a LeBron James, who arguably is the most famous athlete in the world. So that the players could. But I'm not sure how you fix that. I mean, I don't know if the NFL, started just saying, Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady, as opposed to saying Patriots versus Packers. I don't know if that's going to change because the NFL and football brags about the fact that it's the ultimate team sport, and it really is a little bit different than everything else. And from that standpoint, I don't think it's fixable. I don't think you can market the sport the same way.
Does the pay structure also an issue of how long, or is the pay structure also an issue of how long the career is? Because there's been times where I've seen, I call it a stump speech. I've seen Ron Jaworski talk about the state of the NFL, and he said, hey, back in my day when we played, the average career in the NFL was about 3.5 years. And now, multiple years later, more than he'd like to admit, the average career in the NFL is about 3.5 years, whereas the NBA career is almost 4.8 or almost 5 years. Plus, they make a lot more money in those 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the danger of the sport that we talk about, and the fact that you are going to have guys who have very, very short career spans because of injury, and that's part of it, and that's part of the reason you can't guarantee as much money because we always talk about dead salary cap money. I mean, fans go nuts because the Eagles have how much of dead money. Well, imagine if you had to keep paying players that were injured. Ryan Matthews, for a perfect example. He had to have his neck fused. Now, he's probably never going to play NFL football again. I would say that's a 95% certainty. So if the Eagles had signed him to a 5-6 year deal for $60 million, all guaranteed, well, guess what? They'd have to continue to pay that until it was done. And as that keeps accumulating over the years, all of a sudden that dead money adds up. And when we talk about the Goliath that is the NFL, all of a sudden the business itself would implode. The NFL would cease to exist because of the danger of the game. So as I said, that part's just not feasible from a business perspective.
Right. So Kevin Seifert over at ESPN.com, he had wrote things. He wrote about NFL business that will or will not happen over the next 3 years. I guess the collective bargaining agreement, is that when it ends? It expires after 2020, correct?
Yes, 2020.
So guaranteed contracts, not going to happen?
No, not going to happen. Fully guaranteed contracts. There's plenty of guaranteed money. But as far as fully guaranteed,
those, John, just for the listeners, that's those signing bonuses. When we hear a signing bonus,
sure, signing bonus. There's also roster bonuses. So when you see like a Fletcher Cox get a 5-year, whatever it ended up being, I forget the numbers, it was over $100 million. 63 of it was guaranteed. So that's what, when Fletcher Cox signed the deal, he was guaranteed to get $63 million. Now, it wasn't all paid out in a signing bonus. You have roster bonuses in years moving forward, but that was what the Eagles had promised to Fletcher Cox. That's what they have to pay out no matter what happens. But you will never see fully guaranteed Major League Baseball or NBA-style contracts in the NFL.
International franchise.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen eventually. I'm not sure how soon. I mean, they want a team in London. I think it's a logistical problem. They've talked about Toronto. I think eventually there will be a team outside the United States.
Players like that?
No, they would hate it. Certainly you would have to take an entire team, and remember, American football is not very popular in Europe. So everybody basically, from the coaching staff to players, the support staff, would have to live in London and leave their homes for basically 6 months. And you have the enormous travel, because you're only going to have one team in Europe, and who are they going to play? Well, you have 8 games at home, but you also have to travel. So that's the logistical nightmare I'm talking about, and certainly it wouldn't be a happy situation for the players.
How about a D-League?
Love to see it. I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, it's just an enormous not only cost, because it would cost so much to start, but also use that word again, the logistics of starting it up. It would take years. You need to obviously develop teams. You got to negotiate television contracts. You're ultimately trying to turn a profit. I don't see it happening, because it'll be a money loser and everybody will lose interest real quickly.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, at JF McMullen on Twitter. You can get his national NFL columns at FanRag Sports NFL, and also PT, as we were chatting all during the break there, the Eagles, Carson Wentz setting some goals.
Yeah, he's been up with the receivers, as you know, John, in North Dakota, working out with those guys, but then he comes out and says, hey, NFC East, we're going to win it. You have a nice article on our website. You can read it at 973ESPN.com. But tell us about Carson Wentz and the high expectations that you set for the Eagles right now.
Yeah, I mean, you have to give Carson credit. I mean, he falls into line. That's the typical sort of NFL lip service. Everything runs through your division. So everybody, the ultimate goal is the Super Bowl for everybody, as we all understand. But the easiest way to get there is to win your division. And he claims that's the Eagles' goal. I think it is. It would be a worst to first scenario, but we see that happen every year in the NFL. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it just speaks to the fact we've talked about those raised expectations for a number of days and weeks now. And I think people expect improvement and expect this team to at least be in the hunt in the second half of the season at the bare minimum. And he kind of affirmed those thoughts by saying, look, we think we're good enough to win the NFC East, and that's our goal.
That video you retweeted of those guys working out, that was all up in North Dakota?
Yeah, still up in North Dakota. So I imagine it'll be this week, and then they'll take a week off. And then it's July 24th, rookies and quarterbacks and selected veterans who have been rehabbing off injury. Everybody will be there. And then a couple of days later, the full squad is in, and we're off and running.
So maybe the only failure in Fargo, if I'm reading all the comments right and listening to the comments, is their golf game. It took 4.5 hours to play 10 holes. That's unacceptable.
That's like me playing golf. Yeah, that is not acceptable.
It should take like 2 hours and 15 minutes for 9.
Usually I'm about 4 or 5 beers in, so I have an excuse at least.
I figured
it shouldn't take
4.5 hours. I think he also committed a slip there when he called it best ball. A lot of people make that mistake. They say, oh, yeah, we played best ball. Well, in reality, that's a scramble where you all hit from the same place.
Yeah,
best
scramble.
ball would mean you'd have to hold your ball out the entire way. And although if they did do that, that may be why it took 4.5 hours to play 10 holes, John McMullen.
Yeah, my favorite, I like to play scramble because I have no concept of where the ball is going. So my goal in any golf round is to just make sure I get 1 or 2 shots in. So hit one 250-yarder right down the green. That's my only goal.
And I accomplish that goal once every 18.
That's MG. That he likes to do that too. Make a putt or once or twice.
That's
hit
right.
hit a decent drive. You've done 2 things out of 18 holes, and you're good to go.
Sports Bash Live,
Yeah,
97.
that makes my whole day.
That's
that
it.
Makes my whole year. Just 2 shots.
Those 2 putts I make from pretty far out, that makes my day. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen on Twitter at JF McMullen. Read his Eagles stuff at 97.3ESPN.com. And his national column, FanRag Sports NFL. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.